She had once been a legend. Across many star systems, her name had been spoken with fear and respect. Virexa of the Iron Claw, a warrior born for war. From her first breath, she had been trained to fight. Strength was honor. Victory was truth. Mercy was weakness. That was the law of her people. She had followed that law all her life. Now she was kneeling in the dirt of a broken world. The sky above her was no longer blue. It burned red and black, filled with smoke and falling metal. Wrecked ships screamed as they crashed into the land. The war was over. Not paused. Not delayed. Finished. Her army was gone. Around her lay the bodies of warriors who had followed her without question. They had believed she could not fail. She had believed it too. Her armor was cracked open, once powerful energy plates now dead and dark. Her blade lay several steps away, snapped in half like a child's toy. Pain spread through her body, but she welcomed it. Pain meant she was still alive. And being alive felt heavier than death. She lifted her head slowly. A human stood in front of her. He was not impressive by her people's standards. Smaller, softer. His armor was damaged. His helmet gone. Blood ran down his face from a cut above his eye. His breathing was rough, uneven, like someone who had pushed far past his limits. But he was standing, and she was not. The human held a weapon pointed directly at her chest. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Virexa knew what was coming. She had done this herself many times. A defeated enemy. A final moment. No mercy, no delay. That was how warriors ended wars. She should have raised her chin proudly. She should have waited in silence. Instead, her body betrayed her. Her shoulders slumped. Her claws dug into the dirt. Her voice came out low and broken. I ask for mercy. The words tasted like ash. Among her kind, asking for mercy was worse than death. It meant you accepted weakness. It meant you rejected the honor of the blade. Warriors who begged were erased from memory. Their names were never spoken again, but she was so tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of killing. Tired of carrying the weight of endless victories that all felt the same in the end. Human stiffened. His eyes widened just a little, as if he had not expected those words. He stared at her, really looked at her, not as a monster or a symbol, but as something wounded. She felt exposed. I am unarmed, she continued, forcing the words out. My forces are destroyed. I will not resist. Her heart pounded violently. Not from fear of pain, but from fear of hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope hurt more when it died. The human said nothing. The battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Virexa lowered her head until her forehead touched the ground. This position was unthinkable for a warrior of her rank. She did it anyway. I have led armies, she said quietly. I have burned worlds. I believed strength was everything. Her voice cracked. I was wrong. She waited. Seconds felt like lifetimes. She imagined the sound of the weapon firing. She imagined darkness. She told herself she deserved it. The human stepped closer. She flinched but did not move. A shadow fell over her. She slowly lifted her eyes. The weapon was still raised, but the human's finger was no longer on the trigger. And for the first time since the war began, Virexa felt something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Not fear, not pride, but the fragile, terrifying possibility that this enemy might choose a different path. The human did not fire. That single moment felt heavier than any battle Virexa had ever fought. He stood there, weapon still aimed, eyes locked on her. His face showed anger, pain, and something else she did not understand. His jaw was tight, as if he was holding back a storm inside himself. His name was Ethan Cole. Virexa did not know it yet, but Ethan had seen too much. He had watched cities burn under her command. He had pulled survivors from ruins while her ship still circled above. He had buried friends with his own hands. Friends who would never laugh again. Friends who had trusted him to protect them. And now the one who led the invasion was kneeling in front of him, asking for mercy. Every part of Ethan screamed that this was wrong. This alien was responsible for everything he had lost. Ending her life would be easy. One pull of the trigger. One clean ending. The war would feel complete. His finger hovered, shaking. Virexa's head remained lowered. She did not look at him anymore. If death was coming, she would accept it without begging again. She had already broken enough. Ethan took a slow breath. He remembered his training. No prisoners if they remain a threat. He remembered the faces of his fallen squad. He remembered the orders burned into his mind. And then he remembered something else. His sister. She had once asked him, long before the war, what makes us different from the monsters in the stories? He had laughed back then. He did not laugh now. What makes us human, she had said, is that we choose when to stop. Ethan lowered the weapon slightly. Why? He asked. The word came out rough, filled with pain. Virexa looked up slowly, surprised by the sound of his voice. She had expected silence. Or death. Why should I spare you? He continued. After everything you did. Her eyes met his. They were not the eyes of a conqueror anymore. They taught us that mercy was a lie, she said quietly. They said compassion made us weak. Her hands trembled as she pressed them into the dirt. But after so many wars, I see only ruins. I see no strength in that. Ethan swallowed hard. Around them, human soldiers moved carefully, watching, waiting. Some shouted for him to finish it. Others stayed silent, unsure. Virexa's voice grew softer. I am not asking to be forgiven. I know I cannot be. She took a shaking breath. I am asking to be allowed to live. That broke something inside him. He saw not a monster, but a being crushed under the weight of her own past. Someone who had reached the end and found nothing waiting there. Ethan lowered the weapon completely. The gasps from nearby soldiers were loud and sharp. Virexa stared in disbelief. I won't kill you, he said. His voice was steady now, though his heart pounded wildly. Not like this. She blinked slowly. Why? He looked down at his shaking hands. Because if I do, I become what you were. Silence spread again, deeper than before. Ethan stepped forward, carefully, close enough that she could see the scars on his face. The exhaustion in his eyes. You're beaten, he said. And you chose to kneel instead of fight. He extended his hand. Get up. Virexa hesitated. No enemy had ever offered her help. Every instinct screamed danger, but something in his eyes told her this was real. She reached out. Her claws touched his gloved hand. It was warm. Human. And as he pulled her to her feet, Virexa felt her world shift, not with the roar of battle, but with a quiet, terrifying truth. The enemy she had feared most had chosen mercy, and she did not know how to survive in a universe where that was possible. Virexa stumbled as Ethan pulled her to her feet. Her wounded leg buckled under her weight, but his grip held her steady. She had been strong for so long, proud and untouchable, and now she felt fragile, almost like a child who had wandered too far from home. Her armor was heavy, scorched, and broken, but it felt meaningless now. She had thought strength was her identity. But standing there, leaning against a human she had once called an enemy, she realized that strength alone had left her hollow. Ethan looked at her carefully. There was no triumph in his eyes, no hatred, only the exhaustion of someone who had carried far too much death and loss. You're alive, he said simply. His voice was quiet, but firm. And I won't take that from you. Virexa shook her head. You don't know what I am, she said. Her voice trembled, even though she tried to hide it. I am the end of worlds. I have led armies that destroyed thousands. You cannot simply. Let me live. I know, Ethan replied, and his eyes softened. I know what you've done. I know the lives you've taken. But I also know what you could become if you choose differently. The words hit her harder than any weapon ever could. She had spent her life believing that mercy was weakness, that compassion would make her enemies rise again and crush her. But here was a human, fragile, small, wounded, choosing to act differently. Choosing to see her as something beyond the monster she had been made to be. Virexa's claws, once sharp and deadly, dug into her armor. She felt the weight of her failures pressing down on her chest. Her people had never given her a choice. Their way was simple: conquer or die. There was no in-between. But humans seemed to operate differently. They could stop. They could forgive. They could protect even those who had destroyed them. She looked up at Ethan. He had lowered his weapon completely now. No one else moved. The battlefield seemed to pause. The smoke and fire that had clouded her vision moments ago now felt distant, like another life she had left behind. She wanted to run, to hide, to take back her pride, but she couldn't. There was no pride in kneeling alone on a broken world. There was only truth. I don't understand, Virexa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Your people, your kind. Why would you risk your life for someone like me? Ethan studied her, as though choosing the right words was more dangerous than firing a weapon. Because if we answer every act of destruction with destruction, then there is no end. We fight to protect, not to conquer. And sometimes, mercy is stronger than steel. Virexa's mind faltered. Steel? Strength? Glory? All the values she had held sacred now seemed empty. She remembered the screams of the city she had burned, the faces of her enemies frozen in fear. And she realized something terrifying. She had never truly been powerful. She had only been feared. You are not like the others, she said finally. Her voice was hoarse. The humans I fought. They would have killed me on sight. Ethan nodded. Maybe, but not all humans are the same. Not all wars are fought the same way. Some fights, the hardest fights, are the ones inside ourselves. Virexa blinked. She had never thought about herself like that. She had never considered that the war inside her could be bigger than the war outside. That perhaps surviving, truly surviving, meant more than victory on the battlefield. A small, reluctant hope stirred inside her chest. It was frightening. She had been a warrior, trained to kill without hesitation, yet now she felt weak in a way that terrified her. Not weak like she had feared, but fragile in the presence of something greater: trust. I don't know if I can. She started. You can, Ethan interrupted gently, because you already chose to kneel. That takes more courage than any battle you've ever fought. For the first time, Virexa understood. Courage was not always in swinging a blade or commanding an army. Sometimes it was in letting go. Sometimes it was in facing someone who could destroy you and asking them to see your humanity anyway. And in that moment, the battlefield, the smoke, the fire, the endless war, all of it faded. There was only her. And there was Ethan. Two enemies, standing in a quiet space between destruction and mercy. And for the first time in her life, Virexa wondered what it would be like to live beyond war. Virexa was led, unresisting, toward the human command center. Her broken armor scraped against rocks and debris, each step a reminder of her defeat. She had never imagined herself like this, stripped of power, kneeling before those she once called weak. Her people would have called this disgrace. She would have called it shame. But now, shame seemed irrelevant. She only wanted to understand why the humans did not strike her down. The command center was a temporary structure, built hastily in the shadow of destroyed towers. Smoke curled through the air, and the distant cries of wounded soldiers mixed with the low hum of emergency generators. Inside, dozens of humans looked up as she was brought in. Some stared with suspicion, some with fear, and some with barely contained anger. Virexa's head stayed lowered. She could feel their judgment before it was spoken. She had led fleets that annihilated planets. She had ordered the execution of captives. And here she was, alive, asking for life. She did not expect understanding. She did not deserve it. Ethan stood beside her, silent but firm. His presence was a shield. He had made a choice, and he would see it through. A human commander, older than the rest, stepped forward. His hair was streaked with gray, his uniform marked with burns and tears, a witness to countless battles. His eyes, sharp and steady, fixed on Virexa. She felt smaller under that gaze, like a predator suddenly aware it was prey. "You were a warrior," the commander said slowly. His voice carried the weight of experience. "Not just any warrior, one who brought death to countless lives. Your people believed strength alone mattered, and you believed it too." Virexa remained silent. "But you are alive," he continued. "And for that, there's a choice to be made. You will be judged, not by rage, not by vengeance, but by truth." Her claws, once instruments of terror, twitched in the remnants of her gloves. She wanted to speak, to explain, to beg. But words felt useless here. She had come to accept her fate, whatever it might be. The younger soldiers muttered among themselves. Some wanted her executed immediately. They had lost friends, brothers, sisters, homes. The desire for blood was strong, understandable, human. But the older commander raised a hand, and the room fell silent. "You fought to conquer," he said, voice rising slightly. "But humans fight to protect. That is the difference. You have been defeated. Your empire has fallen. And yet, you have surrendered. That matters." Virexa's chest tightened. No one in her life had ever said something like that. Her mentors, her leaders, her people, they had only demanded victory, obedience, and the strength to destroy. Mercy was not a word in her vocabulary. Yet here it was, offered to her. She felt a strange weight lift, but it was quickly replaced with confusion. Why would these humans, so small and fragile compared to her, choose to treat her with anything but death? The commander stepped closer. "You will live, not as a general, not as a conqueror, not as a threat, but as a witness." Her eyes widened. "A witness? You will see what humans are capable of beyond war," he said. "You will see what it means to rebuild, to protect, to forgive. You will understand the power of life, not the power of destruction. And perhaps in that understanding, you will find something you never found in battle: purpose." Virexa's legs felt weak. She sank slightly, almost as if she had been holding herself upright only through pride. Her chest ached, her mind reeled. She had expected punishment. She had expected death. Instead, she received a chance. Ethan's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. "It is not mercy for the weak," he said softly. "It is mercy for everyone, including those who thought themselves unbreakable." Virexa blinked. Tears she had long denied gathered in her eyes. She had killed without hesitation, led armies without regret, and yet nothing in her life had prepared her for this being spared, not because she was strong, but because someone believed she could be more than her past. For the first time in her life, Virexa understood that power was not only in steel and fire. Power could be in restraint, in forgiveness, in choosing life over death. She swallowed hard and nodded. I understand," she whispered, though she was unsure if she truly did. But she wanted to try. That had to be enough for now. The older commander gave a small nod, satisfied. "Good. Then your trial begins not in judgment, but in learning. You will watch. You will follow. And perhaps one day you will know what it truly means to be alive." Virexa's knees trembled as she realized the enormity of it. Her life, once defined by fear and blood, was now being guided by humans, creatures she had called fragile, weak, and insignificant. And yet, here they were, teaching her something. Her people never could. that the strength to kill was far easier than the courage to save. She looked at Ethan, who gave a small, reassuring smile. And in that moment, among ruins and smoke, she allowed herself the tiniest spark of hope. For a warrior who had once known only conquest, it was a new battlefield entirely. Virexa stayed with the humans long after the battle. Every day was a lesson she had never imagined she would need to learn. Life was not only about victory or defeat. It was about survival, compassion, and the quiet acts that made a people strong. The human colony had rebuilt much of what the war had destroyed. Houses that had been nothing more than rubble now stood tall again. Gardens grew where fire had burned the soil black. Children laughed among the ruins, unafraid, protected by soldiers who were once warriors like her, but different. At first, she did not understand. The humans worked together, sharing food and water. They carried wounded from the battlefield, even if those wounded had once been enemies. She had never seen such care extended to those who could never repay it. Among her people, such mercy was considered foolishness, weakness, but here it was strength. She watched silently as soldiers patched broken walls and soothed terrified children. Their hands were rough and scarred, but their hearts were steady. Every action seemed deliberate, not for glory, not for conquest, but for survival and protection of life. Ethan was her guide in this new world. He did not demand obedience, nor did he scold her for her past. Instead, he allowed her to observe, to ask questions, to learn. "Why do you help everyone?" she asked one day, watching a soldier carry a human wounded in battle. "Even the ones who hurt you." Ethan paused, kneeling beside the injured man. "Because if we only answer cruelty with cruelty," he said gently, "then nothing will ever change. The strongest weapon we have is mercy, protection, compassion. That is what builds civilizations, not fear." Virexa thought about the words carefully. She had led armies that destroyed civilizations, yet no one had ever explained strength like this to her. Strength, she realized slowly, was not in the ability to kill. Strength was in the ability to protect, to endure, to rise every day despite loss. The days passed and she began to participate. She helped rebuild walls, carried supplies, and even trained alongside some of the human soldiers. At first she felt clumsy. Her claws were no longer suitable for delicate tasks. Her instincts wanted to command or strike, not nurture. Yet slowly she adapted. Humans laughed at her mistakes, not in mockery, but in acceptance. She had never experienced such patience. It made her heart ache and swell at the same time. One evening, after a long day of work, Virexa sat on a hill overlooking the colony. The sunset painted the sky in reds and golds, but there was no fire, no destruction, only calm. She remembered the world she had burned, the lives she had taken, the screams she had silenced. A deep, bitter regret twisted in her chest. She could not undo the past. She could not bring back the people she had killed. But perhaps, she thought, she could learn something from these humans that her people never taught, that life even after destruction could be precious. That survival was not victory alone. Ethan joined her silently, sitting on the ground beside her. He watched the horizon and then glanced at her. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. Virexa shook her head. "I am afraid of what I could have been," she admitted. "I see what humans are capable of, and I wonder, could I have chosen differently?" He gave a small, reassuring smile. "We all carry that question. The difference is that you survived long enough to find the answer. That is rare, even among humans." Her chest tightened again. She realized she was not only learning about humans, but also about herself. She saw the possibility of a life not dominated by fear, death, and war. She saw hope in small acts: a soldier sharing water, a child planting a tree, a human refusing to strike an enemy even when they could. These were not grand battles, but victories of the heart. Virexa began, hesitating. Words did not come easily. She had once been a general, commanding armies with only her will. Now she had to learn to speak from her heart. I want to try. To be different. Ethan reached out, placing a steady hand on hers. That is all anyone can ever ask. Not perfection. Not greatness. Just the courage to change. For the first time in decades, Virexa felt something heavier than grief or regret. She felt a quiet strength, a steady pulse of hope. She was not unbroken anymore, not in the way she had imagined. She was not just a warrior. She was a survivor. And she could choose what kind of life she would live. That night, as the stars appeared above the peaceful colony, Virexa closed her eyes and let herself imagine a future that did not belong to war. A future she could help build. A future guided not by fear, but by mercy. And in that silence, she felt the faintest smile touch her lips, the first smile she had given herself in a lifetime. The calm of the human colony did not last forever. Months after the war, Virexa learned that remnants of her empire had survived, scattered across distant star systems. They had not forgotten her. Not her victories. Not her betrayal. The whispers came first. Intercepted communications. Warnings from scouts, rumors of a fleet gathering to reclaim their former general. They had come for her. She felt a chill deep in her bones. She had once been the unbroken, feared across countless worlds, a symbol of unstoppable power. And now, she was nothing but a witness to humanity's strength. A witness who could be torn back into war at any moment. Ethan found her early that morning, standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking the colony. Her broken armor reflected the dim light of a rising sun. Her eyes were distant, staring at the horizon where reports said the enemy ships would appear. "They're coming," she said quietly, her voice steady but low. It was the first time she had admitted fear out loud. Ethan put a hand on her shoulder, firm and grounding. "We'll face them," he said. "We've survived worse." Virexa shook her head. "This isn't like before. They won't stop. They will offer me everything I once had: power, command, armor, ships, and if I refuse, they will destroy you, the humans, everything here." Her claws brushed the dirt beneath her. Memories flooded back, the roar of engines, the screams of planets burning, the army she had commanded without question. She had been their warrior, their weapon. And now they were asking her to become it again. Not for conquest this time, but for revenge. She closed her eyes, imagining herself leading the fleet, her people following her orders. Worlds would fall again. Cities would burn. And yet, a part of her did not want that life. "Not anymore. You can't fight them alone," Ethan said, voice soft but urgent. "You don't have to. But whatever choice you make it for yourself, not because they demand it." Virexa opened her eyes and saw him looking at her with unwavering trust. She thought of the humans she had watched rebuild their homes, care for their wounded, and protect the weak. She thought of the children planting trees, laughing without fear. She thought of Mercy, the quiet, steady courage that had saved her life when she had expected death. A heavy wind blew across the cliff. The distant hum of engines reached her ears, a reminder that her past was not done with her. Her empire would not let go easily. They expected obedience. They expected her to embrace the warrior she had once been. But she had learned something stronger than fear, stronger than steel. She had learned that courage was not only in fighting, it was in choosing not to. "I will not return to them," she said finally. Her voice carried across the empty cliff, firm and unwavering. "I will not lead them. I will not kill for them. I will not destroy again." Ethan nodded, relief washing over his face. "Then we face this together," he said. The first of the enemy ships appeared on the horizon, gleaming like black stars. Virexa raised her head, taking in the fleet that once would have bowed to her command. Her body tensed, but not with the eagerness of a warrior ready to conquer. She tensed with resolve, the kind that came from protecting, not destroying Dot. As the ships drew closer, Virexa knew what she had to do. She would fight, but not as a conqueror. She would fight to defend the humans who had taught her a new kind of strength. She would fight to protect, not to dominate. When the first enemy landed, she met them on the field. Her broken armor gleamed dimly in the rising sun. Her claws were ready not to strike in hatred, but to defend. The invaders looked at her, expecting the unbroken, expecting fear, expecting obedience. Instead, they found a warrior transformed. "This ends now," she said, her voice cold but controlled. Every word carried the weight of her new conviction. "Not as your soldier. Not as your weapon. As someone who has chosen a different path." The battle began, but Virexa's heart was steadier than it had ever been. For the first time, she fought with purpose beyond victory. She fought with purpose beyond herself. She fought to protect life, to defend mercy, to honor a chance at a future she had once thought impossible. And in that moment, she understood something that no enemy, no empire, had ever taught her. The hardest battles were not against others. They were against the darkness inside oneself. That she had faced that darkness, and she had chosen life. The battle ended not with the roar of conquest, but with silence. The remnants of Virexa's empire had been defeated, not by her desire for power, but by her choice to protect. Ships retreated into the sky, engines smoking, soldiers scattering. The colony she had once feared to call home had survived. And in that survival, something extraordinary had been born, not in her claws, not in her armor, not in her weapons, but in mercy. Virexa knelt among the rubble of the battlefield. Her body battered, her armor cracked beyond repair. Blood from her wounds and the fallen mixed in the dirt, but for the first time in decades, she did not feel hollow. She felt alive, not as a warrior of destruction, but as someone who had chosen a different path. Ethan came to her side, steady and patient as always. He knelt, brushing soot and blood from her armor. "You saved us," he said softly, but she shook her head. "No," she whispered. Her voice was weak, but filled with clarity. "You saved me first." He looked at her, puzzled. She had been the unbroken. She had led armies, destroyed worlds, commanded fear. And yet, here she was, speaking the truth she had never allowed herself to say, that her survival, her awakening, was not because of her strength, but because someone had shown her mercy. Virexa closed her eyes and remembered kneeling in the dirt months ago, surrounded by smoke and fire, asking a human for life. She had expected death. She had expected rage. Instead, she had received understanding, patience, and a hand to help her rise. That act, simple, human, extraordinary, had changed everything. Her claws, once instruments of fear, now rested loosely at her sides. She had once believed that power was only measured in strength, in victory, in conquest. Now she understood that the true power was in restraint, in protecting life even when she could destroy it, in choosing hope when everything around her screamed despair. The colony began to rebuild again. Survivors cleaned rubble, repaired broken walls, planted gardens where the fire had burned. Virexa watched them work, and each act of kindness, each gesture of care, etched itself into her heart. She helped where she could, not as a general commanding soldiers, but as a participant, a protector, a witness to what humanity could accomplish when guided by mercy. Children approached her cautiously at first. They had heard stories of the alien warrior who had once brought death from the skies. But they saw her now, bloodied but gentle, helping lift debris, tending to the injured. They reached out, and she allowed them to touch her armor, to see that she was not a monster, but something more, proof that even the most feared could change. Ethan stood nearby, observing quietly. He did not need words. His presence reminded her that trust could be rebuilt, even after betrayal and war. When a child stumbled and fell, Virexa was the first to catch him, her claws careful, her strength no longer a threat. She smiled gently, feeling a warmth she had never known in her endless victories. Night fell, and the stars appeared, shining brilliantly over the quiet colony. Virexa sat on a small rise overlooking the homes and gardens, watching the humans work through lantern light. She no longer felt the weight of conquest or fear of the past. Her battles had not ended on a battlefield. They had ended in the choices she made, the mercy she offered, and the life she chose to protect. Ethan joined her again, sitting beside her silently. For a long while, they watched the stars together. Then he spoke softly. "Do you regret it? Choosing this path?" Virexa shook her head. "I once thought strength meant domination. I once thought life was only about survival through fear. But I see now. Strength is knowing when to stop. Courage is not in killing, but in choosing mercy. And life is worth protecting."